Every nurse is taught to watch monitors, follow protocol, and trust the chart. But sometimes the first sign of life comes from a place no machine can read. In a night filled with fear, chaos, and impossible odds, one rookie nurse chose compassion over panic and saw what everyone else missed. Her courage did more than calm a deadly dog. It pulled hope back into a room that had already surrendered.
A code black alert rang through the trauma center, but the crisis was not about the patient. It was for the loyal guardian who would not leave him. For 6 straight hours, a military dog named Baron commanded a high-tech trauma room. He stood over his fallen Navy SEAL partner, defying anyone who tried to approach. Snipers were in position, ready to take the shot on command. But then a soft-spoken, 23-year-old nurse did what no one expected. She walked into the tense room, offering only her unprotected arm. Her one defense was a tattoo, not a weapon. What happened next left every single person speechless. This single event would forever change the hospital. It is the real story of a bond so strong that even death itself could not sever it. The call came into Centara Norfolk General Hospital at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, breaking the quiet of the night shift. A helicopter was 5 minutes out carrying 2 casualties, one barely alive and the other already gone. The dispatcher also warned that a canine was on board and that the animal was highly agitated. Dr. Alistair de Stirling, the chief surgeon, woke from a short nap and put on his gloves. His world was a simple math problem of blood loss versus time. He hated any kind of surprise, particularly a dog in his operating bay. Agitated? Stirling asked Brenda, the charge nurse, who was staring at the heart monitors. Why is there a dog on that helicopter? If the handler is gone, they need to put it in a kennel, Brenda replied with a strained voice. They could not do it, Doctor. The pilot says the dog broke free just after his handler passed away. The animal is not secured in the cabin, she continued. Stirling swore under his breath. All right. Tell security to meet them on the helipad with a stun gun. I want the body in Bay 1 and that dog taken care of in less than a minute. But the night was not going to follow Dr. Stirling's orders. When the chopper touched down, its rotors turned the rain into a violent storm. Medical staff sprinted toward the helicopter, shielding their faces from the powerful winds. The door opened, showing the tragic conclusion of a mission in a distant land. On the gurney was Master Chief Dalton Ghost Rivers, a legendary operator from the Special Forces. His file was so secret that it appeared as a single black line. But in that moment he was just a man under a sheet, his last battle now finished, and resting right on his chest was Baron. Baron was 80 pounds of pure muscle, a Belgian Malinois with a deep brown coat. His face was like a black mask, hiding everything except his eyes, and those eyes were glowing with a fierce and protective fire. A big paramedic named Rick went to grab the gurney. Baron did not attack or bite. He just let out a low growl that seemed to shake the helicopter's floor. He revealed a set of titanium-capped teeth designed for combat. "Hey, get back!" Rick yelled, pulling his hands away quickly. The flight medic shouted above the engine noise, "We cannot reach him. The dog is between us and the chief. He thinks we are a threat." Security guards in yellow jackets arrived carrying catch poles and tasers. "Do not do that," the medic warned, holding up his hands. "That is a Tier 1 military working dog. He will spot a weapon and he will attack. Everyone stay back." For 10 very long minutes they were at a standstill in the heavy rain while the helicopter idled. Suddenly an engine shudder moved the gurney. Baron released a sad, high-pitched cry that pierced through the racket. He tenderly licked Dalton Rivers's still face and pushed him with his nose, searching for any sign of life. The medics took their opportunity and seized the stretcher. "Go! Go now! Do not make eye contact with him." They hurried the gurney to the emergency entrance. Baron did not fight them this time. He sat motionless on the gurney like a statue, a quiet protector watching over his partner as they entered the bright lights of Trauma Bay 1. The automatic doors slid shut, sealing off the noise of the storm. A strange quiet settled over the emergency room. The gurney stopped in the center of the room, surrounded by millions of dollars of medical gear. Barron got to his feet. He shook the rain from his fur, sending water across the sterile equipment. He positioned his paws at the four corners of the gurney, turning himself into a living barrier for Dalton Rivers. He glared at the medical team, lowered his head, and his growl was like the sound of grinding metal. Every person in the room was frozen in place. Tucked in a corner behind a supply cart was the newest nurse, Cassidy June. She was 24 years old, with untidy blonde hair and a perpetually worried look in her eyes. She had only been working there for 3 weeks. She was the nurse who was always told to get coffee, the one Dr. Sterling frequently criticized for being too slow. Cassidy watched the dog closely. She noticed his rigid muscles and his wide, dark pupils. But she also noticed something else. His front paw was trembling just a little. "He is scared," she whispered. "Be quiet, June," Sterling commanded, without turning to look at her. "Security, I need that animal gone. I have to call the time of death, and I refuse to do it with that thing in here." 3 guards moved forward with their batons out. Barron responded with a sound like a whip crack. He snapped his strong jaws in the air, barely missing a guard's head, and then immediately went back to his post. "That is enough. I have had it," Sterling shouted, backing away. "Everyone out of the room. Call the police canine unit and animal control this instant, and find me a tranquilizer gun. If he moves again, you have my approval to put him down." The staff quickly left the area. The glass doors of Trauma Bay 1 closed, leaving the faithful dog and his handler alone inside as their time was quickly running out. By 4 in the morning, the situation had escalated from a hospital issue to a national security concern. The waiting room was filled with police officers, held back by 2 men in dark suits who arrived in a government car. They said they were from the Department of Defense and would not talk to any reporters. Inside the observation room for Trauma Bay 1, the air was thick with tension. Sterling walked back and forth, checking his watch every 30 seconds. "This has gotten completely out of hand," he complained, gesturing toward the room. "I have a deceased American hero in there, and a simple pet is holding up the entire hospital." One of the agents, a man named Miller, calmly corrected him. "Doctor, that is not a pet. He is a specialized asset, a military service animal. His training is worth about $50,000. And just so we are clear, his rank in the military is higher than yours." Sterling's face flushed a dark red. "He is a danger to my hospital and is obstructing a medical procedure. I am giving the police authority to stop this." Down on the floor, Barron had not moved. The dog had calmed down, with his large paws resting gently on Dalton's chest. The rush of adrenaline was gone, replaced by a profound grief that caused him to shake. Whenever someone passed the glass, Barron's ears would turn, and a faint growl could be heard through the thick pane. Cassidy June was cleaning a floor nearby, trying to stay out of sight, but she was unable to look away from the scene inside the bay. She saw the dog's heavy breathing, his drool dripping on the blood-stained uniform. A deep sense of recognition came over her. She knew that stance, the exact way he was holding his head. Brenda, the head nurse, snapped her fingers at Cassidy. "Hey, are you paying attention? Quit staring and go get some saline bags for Bay 4. Cassidy replied quietly, "He's watching his 6. Brenda paused what she was doing. "His what?" Cassidy repeated herself, holding the mop tightly. "His 6 o'clock. His rear. He thinks his partner is just injured. He's providing security. He will not back down until his handler gives the order." Brenda looked at Cassidy with a mix of pity and annoyance. "Listen, honey, that man is not going to be giving any more orders, and the police are planning to put that dog to sleep in about 20 minutes. She was right. The local SWAT leader, a Captain Holloway, had arrived and was now speaking with Dr. Sterling. Miller explained to Holloway, "A tranquilizer is not a good option. His heart rate is too high, and the stress could kill him. If you miss, he will break through that glass before the drug can work." "That animal is a deadly weapon," Holloway replied with cold logic. "Then our only other option is a live round." "One clean shot," Holloway stated. "That is the only certain way to make the area safe and retrieve the body." Miller offered one final, quiet objection. "He is a decorated war hero." Sterling cut in. "He is a liability." "This is a medical facility, not a dog park. Do it." The matter was settled. Holloway signaled a sniper, who raised his rifle in the hallway. Cassidy felt her stomach drop. She dropped her mop, and it fell to the floor with a loud noise that made everyone look. "Stop!" she called out. Her voice was shaky, but clear enough for everyone to hear. Dr. Sterling shot her a furious look. "Nurse June, do your work or leave my hospital. You cannot shoot him," she said, walking toward them with her body trembling. "He is just following his training. He is waiting for a command we do not have, miss," Agent Miller said with an exhausted voice. "His handler is dead. That military branch is secret. We cannot get a new trainer here for at least 4 hours. We are out of choices." "I can make him stand down," Cassidy said. The entire room went completely quiet. Sterling laughed, a cruel and mocking sound. "You? A broken bone made you dizzy last week. How can you face a military dog?" Cassidy's voice was firm, surprisingly sure. "I know, Baron. I know the procedures." Brenda sneered. "You are just a new nurse," Cassidy begged Agent Miller. "Please, I only need 5 minutes. If I cannot soothe him, you can take action. But do not let them put down a hero for loving his handler." Miller looked from the sniper to the nurse. He checked his watch. "You get 3 minutes. And know this, if he lunges, we shoot through you. Understood?" Cassidy just nodded, taking one deep breath. She hit the button, and the glass doors hissed open. The room smelled of blood, wet fur, and antiseptic. Instantly, Baron was standing. But this time he was silent. His ears were pinned back, his body rigid and still. He hunched down, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Cassidy stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing her in with the dog. Everyone watched through the glass, horrified. Dr. Sterling shook his head. "She will be mauled." He ordered, "Prepare a trauma team for major blood loss." Cassidy paused about 10 feet from the gurney. She purposefully did not look at the dog or the soldier. Her eyes stayed locked on the dog's paws. "Hey, friend," she whispered. Baron unleashed a horrifying roar that could stop a heart. His jaws snapped shut with a loud crack that filled the room. The dog stepped off the gurney, blocking her path to Dalton. He was massive up close. A pale scar cut across his dark snout. Cassidy did not move a muscle. She turned sideways to seem less like a threat. "Fuss," she said softly, the German word for heel. The dog's ears flickered. He knew the word, but chose to ignore it. He crept closer, the fur on his back standing straight up. He was now just 5 feet away. One leap was all it would take. "He's about to attack," Holloway said, signaling the sniper. Cassidy saw the dog's body tense for the lunge. She had seconds left. Words were useless now. The dog was lost to instinct and grief. He needed a sign, something he could see. Very slowly, Cassidy lifted her left arm. She wore a simple blue nurse's uniform. Her right hand reached for the sleeve on her left shoulder. Baron growled at her motion, baring his teeth. He was ready to bite her arm. Cassidy gripped the sleeve and began to push it up. She rolled it over her elbow, revealing faint, old scars. She kept going to her shoulder. On her skin, There was a tattoo. This was no flower or butterfly. It was a dark, intricate design. It showed a broken spear, a lightning bolt, and a paw print. Below it were the letters K9DH Unit 4. Baron froze. The big dog cocked his head. His growl stopped, and he took a sudden, sharp breath. His furious eyes were now fixed on the symbol. It was the official mark of the Dark Horse K9 unit, a secret military program that was not supposed to be real. Cassidy then tapped the tattoo 2 times with 2 fingers. She knelt on the bloody floor, making herself vulnerable in a show of total trust. "Baron," she said, her tone full of a new emotion no one there had heard before. "Baron, stand down. Your duty is complete." The strong dog began to tremble. He glanced at the soldier, then the woman, then the tattoo. He took a slow step closer. He smelled the air. Beneath the hospital smell, he caught another scent. He smelled gun oil. He smelled pine needles from a distant place. He smelled a memory. Baron made a soft sound, a whimper that broke everyone's heart. He walked straight to Cassidy. He gently pushed his head against her chest, so hard it took her breath away. Cassidy hugged the massive dog and sobbed into his fur. "I know," she whispered to him. "I know, buddy. I miss him too." Outside, Agent Miller removed his sunglasses. "Well, I will be," he murmured. "She is no ordinary nurse." Dr. Stirling stared, his mouth wide open. "Who is she?" Miller faced the stunned doctor. With that mark, she must be his original trainer. The quiet in Trauma Bay 1 felt absolute. Only the dog's breathing and the nurse's soft sobs could be heard. Agent Miller signaled the sniper to stand down. He holstered his weapon and motioned to Dr. Stirling through the glass. "Stirling, open the door. The danger is over," Miller commanded. "Do it very slowly." As the doors parted, a strange smell filled the hall. It was wet dog mixed with the metallic scent of a battlefield. "Nurse June?" Dr. Stirling asked. His usual bold voice was now a faint whisper. He entered the room with caution, watching the dog. Cassidy ignored him. She was checking Baron for injuries, speaking a fast mix of German and Dutch. "Bra, rustic-like and—" "Good boy, stay still. Let me check." Baron, the same dog who held off a SWAT team, was now leaning on her. His eyes were half closed, his long vigil finally over. "Cassidy," Agent Miller said as he walked in. He stared at the tattoo on her arm. "I have not seen a Dark Horse tattoo in 3 years. I thought that entire program was shut down." Cassidy rose with weary elegance. She wiped away tears, smudging dog drool on her cheek. She suddenly looked much older. The soft nurse had vanished, replaced by a woman with a hard, determined jaw. "They did not shut it down, Agent," she said, her voice now raspy. "They buried it. That is a very different thing." Miller's eyes widened with sudden recognition. "You are Cassidy June?" he said. "See, Jay, the famous handler from Kandahar. You ran the elite dog program." Dr. Stirling blinked, stunned. He thought, "My nurse, who cannot even use the pharmacy computer." Cassidy looked at the surgeon. "I know how the system works, doctor. I pretend not to so people will leave me alone. I came here to be invisible." She turned to the gurney. Her hand shook as she touched Master Chief Dalton Rivers's cold boot. "I let him down," she whispered, as memories flooded her mind. 3 years ago, Cassidy June was not in a Norfolk hospital. She was on a dusty base in Jalalabad, in gear covered with sweat and dog treats. She was not a soldier, but something more rare. She was an expert who could see a puppy and know if it could jump from a plane at 20,000 feet. She met Dalton Rivers there. He was looking for a new partner at the kennels. His previous dog, Rex, had died in a roadside blast. Dalton was bitter and did not trust the 21-year-old woman running the program. "I need a weapon, not a pet," Dalton had sneered at the kennels. "Give me your meanest dog." "You do not want mean," Cassidy answered, unfazed by his rank. "Mean will get you killed. Mean is just another name for afraid. You need control. You need an on and off switch." She led him to the last crate, marked Project Baron. Baron was a challenge. Too smart, too focused, and dropped by 3 handlers. If a handler hesitated, Baron took over. In combat, that independence could be fatal. "He does not follow orders blindly," Cassidy said, opening the crate. Baron ignored Dalton and sat by Cassidy, eyeing a ball in her pocket. "He needs a partner who thinks faster than he does." Dalton knelt. For just a second, his hard expression softened. He made no move to touch the dog. He simply waited. Baron approached, sniffed Dalton's neck, and then did something that astonished Cassidy. He raised a paw and set it directly on Dalton's knee. "He's chosen you," Cassidy said softly. For the next 6 months, Cassidy forged the bond between the man and the dog. She taught them to match their breathing. She trained Dalton to understand the smallest twitch of Baron's ears. Cassidy conditioned Baron to follow only the sound of Dalton's heartbeat on a mission. Out in the dust and heat, the 3 of them operated as one. A powerful connection grew between Cassidy and Dalton. It was not a love story, but a bond built on survival, shared danger, and quiet conversations under Afghan stars about a peaceful life they both craved. While petting Baron one day, Dalton told her, "When I finish here, I am taking him. Then I am coming for you. We will open a kennel. No more fighting." "You promise?" she had asked him. He smiled and answered, "On my honor." Then the Pesh Valley mission happened. Cassidy was not on site, but she listened to every word over the radio from the base. She heard the ambush start. She heard a massive blast. And then there was only static. The official report said Dalton was evacuated with critical injuries, but had survived. Baron was listed as lost in combat, likely killed. That news shattered something inside Cassidy. She left the world of private security. The memories were too raw. She moved to Norfolk, Dalton's hometown, clinging to the smallest hope she might see him. But that meeting never took place. She found out he had gone right back to active duty. She guessed he either forgot her or blamed her for losing his dog. So she became a nurse, choosing to heal rather than to harm. Back in the emergency room, Cassidy collected herself. "He found him," she said to the room, stroking Baron's head. Dalton returned for his dog. He did not leave him behind. He went to find Baron. That has to be why he was still over there. She looked over at Agent Miller, searching his face for an answer. Miller gave a slow nod. It was an unofficial mission, not sanctioned by anyone. Master Chief Rivers had heard a wild Malinois was creating problems for the Taliban by leading a pack of strays, so he used his own vacation time to go get his partner. "And he found him," Cassidy whispered, as tears finally streamed down her face. "He brought him back. But it took his life." Dr. Sterling cleared his throat. The emotion in the room was heavy, but he had rules to follow. "Nurse June, I mean Cassidy," Sterling said, correcting his mistake. "I am sorry for your loss. I truly am. But we have a legal duty now. The coroner is on his way. We have to prepare the body. Would you please take the dog out of the room?" Cassidy just nodded. She took a deep, calming breath and looked down at Baron. "Baron," she said firmly. "Vrij. Free." This was his release word, the command that meant his job was finished. It meant he could simply be a dog. But Baron did not move. He stood up, but refused to leave. Instead, he turned and put his front paws back on the gurney, right on Dalton's chest. He looked at Cassidy and gave one sharp, demanding bark. "Woof!" Cassidy was in shock. "I gave him the release word," she mumbled to herself. "He never disobeys." Maybe the poor animal is just confused, Brenda suggested from the doorway. Baron barked again, with more intensity this time. He looked from Cassidy to Dalton's face, and then back to Cassidy again. He nudged Dalton's chest with his nose. Woof! Woof! A cold sense of dread washed over Cassidy. She knew every sound that dog made. She could tell his bark for a threat, for play, and for a warning. This was his warning bark. It was the signal he gave when he found a survivor in a rescue zone. "Doctor," Cassidy said, her voice unsteady. "Bring the crash cart." "What?" Sterling demanded, clearly annoyed. "Nurse, he has been gone 6 hours." The medic called it. "His body is already cold. Get the cart," Cassidy ordered, her stare so fierce that the guards flinched. "The dog is alerting. He is signaling he found someone alive." "That is utterly absurd," Sterling scoffed. "His skin is pale. He is cold as a stone." "Baron is never wrong," Cassidy replied with certainty. She grabbed a stethoscope from its hook on the wall. She did not ask for permission. She walked around the dog, who let her pass, but blocked the others. And she put the earpieces in. She pulled the warm blanket off the body. She pressed the diaphragm of the stethoscope to Dalton Rivers' motionless, scarred chest. The room became deathly quiet. Cassidy closed her eyes, pushing down harder, trying to hear anything over the hospital's faint hum. Thump. The noise was barely audible, like a distant water drip. She kept on listening. 5 seconds went by, and then 10. Thump. Cassidy's eyes flew wide open. She looked at Dr. Sterling, her face as white as a sheet. "He is alive," she breathed. "It is the Lazarus phenomenon. His heart is beating very slowly. It has to be severe hypothermia, possibly hidden by a drug." Sterling rushed to her side. "This is impossible." He took the stethoscope to hear for himself. In that one moment all of his professional arrogance melted away. "Code blue!" Sterling yelled to the team. "I have a heartbeat. It is weak, but it is there. I need epinephrine and warmed saline." "Warm everything up. We have to intubate. Now, people, let us move." The trauma bay burst into organized chaos. This was not the typical, calm pace of a hospital emergency. This felt more like battlefield medicine. "I need femoral access," Sterling shouted. "Nurse, cut his pants off. Get a warming blanket on him. We cannot get near him." "Rick," the paramedic yelled. He moved in with defibrillator pads, but Baron growled and snapped at him. The dog was now overwhelmed. All the noise and frantic motion toward his handler felt like a fresh assault. He lunged, his teeth catching the sleeve of a doctor's white coat. "Somebody get that dog out of here," Sterling yelled. "I cannot work with an animal in the room." "No!" Cassidy shouted in return. She was managing 2 tasks, preparing an IV line while holding Baron's collar. If he goes, he will break down the door. He knows Dalton is still here. Well, you need to control him, June, or I promise I will have him put down myself. Cassidy immediately knelt beside the gurney, right in the center of the frantic activity. She cupped Baron's face in her hands, forcing the dog to look into her eyes. "Baron, Platz, Blell." The dog was trembling with fear, his gaze fixed on the team surrounding Dalton. "Look at me," Cassidy insisted, her face just inches from the dog's powerful jaws. "They are helping him. They are helping." She took Baron's paw, put it on her own chest over her heart, and then placed it on Dalton's arm. "Friend," she said softly. "Pack." Baron let out a quiet whimper, but finally sat. He positioned himself by the gurney's wheels, tucking his body underneath. He became completely still, like a statue, with his eyes locked on the heart monitor's flat line. "Okay, he is clear," Cassidy said. "Go." For the next hour, Cassidy June was much more than a nurse. She was a connection. She kept one hand buried in the dog's thick fur and used the other to pass supplies to Dr. Sterling. "His core temperature is 82 degrees, Brenda said. "He has hypothermia." Giving one of epinephrine, a resident called out, "No change on the monitor. Come on, Dalton," Cassidy whispered, looking at the still grey face of the man from the desert. "You did not survive all of that just to leave us here in Norfolk. You have to fight." From under the gurney, Barron began to howl. It was not a loud noise. It was a deep, constant, and almost musical sound. He was calling to his handler. "What is that sound?" Sterling asked, with sweat on his forehead. "He is calling him back," Cassidy answered. "Just keep going." And then a single beep came from the machine. A weak, unsteady green line appeared. "Beep, beep, we have a rhythm!" Brenda shouted with joy. "Sinus bradycardia!" "It is getting stronger. His pressure is rising," the anesthesiologist said. 80/40. Now 90/50. Dalton's chest rose and fell with a shaky breath. A puff of mist clouded the breathing tube. "He is back," Sterling said, his hands dropping with a huge sigh of relief. "My goodness, he is back." The room filled with cheers and relieved crying. Nurses began to hug each other. Even Agent Miller, the silent man in the corner, wiped a tear from his eye. But Cassidy did not celebrate. She slid down the wall to the floor, completely exhausted. Barron crawled out from underneath the gurney. He did not go to Dalton. He went straight to Cassidy. He started to lick the tears from her cheeks, his tail thumping quietly on the cabinets. And here is the end of the story. 2 days later, Dalton Rivers was in stable condition. He was in the intensive care unit, warm and bandaged, slowly waking up. The story went viral. It was about the dog who guarded a ghost, and the nurse who had faith in him. Cassidy was reading at his bedside, with Barron asleep on the floor. The hospital made a rare exception for the dog. He was now considered an official therapy animal. Dalton groaned quietly. His eyes fluttered open. He blinked in the bright, clean room. He saw the dog first, and then he saw the woman beside him. "Cass," he managed to say, his voice weak and hoarse. "Hey there, soldier," she answered with a gentle smile, putting down her book. "You took your sweet time opening your eyes." "I had to retrieve him," Dalton whispered. "I had to keep a promise." "I know you did," she said, taking his hand gently. Dalton gave her fingers a weak squeeze. He glanced from Barron to her, his face growing serious. "Cassidy," he began, as his heart rate ticked up on the monitor, "Barron was not protecting me." Cassidy looked puzzled. "What are you talking about?" "Of course he was. He stayed by your side for 6 solid hours." "No," Dalton rasped, grimacing as he tried to shift. "You need to listen. In the helicopter, before I blacked out, I hid something in his vest." "What did you hide in his vest?" "The intelligence," Dalton said faintly. "The real reason they took us down. Why my men abandoned me. It was not a rescue, Cass. It was a mission to silence us." Cassidy froze completely. The temperature in the hospital room seemed to drop by 100 degrees. "Dalton, what are you trying to tell me?" "I am telling you," Dalton whispered, his eyes locked on the door, "that the men who shot me were on our side. I believe one of them is downstairs right now, waiting for visiting hours to begin." Cassidy glanced down at Barron. The dog was now wide awake. He was not looking at Dalton. His eyes were fixed on the room's door, and a low growl rumbled from deep inside his chest. The steady pulse of the heart monitor was the only sound that matched the pounding in Cassidy's chest. Dalton's words filled the air like a heavy fog, a silencing mission. She got to her feet, her hands starting to tremble. She saw the heavy tactical harness Barron still had on. The hospital staff had attempted to take it off, but the dog would snarl whenever they approached. Now she knew why. He was not just defending his handler. He was guarding the proof. "Where is the evidence?" Cassidy whispered, kneeling next to the dog. Dalton lifted a trembling finger. "It is in the left shoulder section, tucked deep inside the fabric. You are going to have to cut it." Cassidy pulled the trauma shears from her pocket, the very ones she used in emergencies. She ran her fingers along the inside of Baron's heavy harness. She found it. A tiny, hard rectangle, smaller than her pinky nail, was stitched into the padding. She pushed the shears into the material and made a single, quick cut. A small memory card fell right into her palm. "I have it," she thought. "Hide it," Dalton urged with a weak voice, his gaze on the doorknob. "And if Miller is the one to walk in, you run." The handle started to turn. Cassidy had no time to get away. She shoved the card into her scrub cap, hiding it within her bun. She spun around as the door swung open. It was Agent Miller. He was alone. He had removed his suit coat, and his sleeves were rolled up. He appeared perfectly calm and professional, which made him seem extremely dangerous. "Agent Miller," she said. "Dr. Sterling mentioned our patient was conscious." "That is a true miracle," Miller said with a frosty smile. "He is still very fragile." Cassidy stuttered, stepping to block the path between Miller and the bed. Baron rose to his feet, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. It was not a warning. It was the sound of an animal getting ready to fight. "I am sure he is," Miller replied, coming in and closing the door. He turned the lock. The click was as loud as a gunshot. "I need his official statement immediately. The regulations state that I must do this alone. You can wait out in the hallway." "I am absolutely not leaving him," Cassidy declared, holding her position. "His vital signs are unstable. Your hospital policies mean nothing to me." Miller's tone turned much colder. He reached down toward his pants. He was not going for a badge. He took out a syringe. "And I really do not mind having a witness." Dalton struggled to sit up, but his injuries were too severe. "Miller, don't do this. The files have already been uploaded." "That was a good effort, Ghost," Miller sneered, removing the cap from the needle. "We jammed every signal in that valley. Nothing got out. You died in an accident, a real tragedy. And this dog, well, he will have to be put down for attacking a nurse. Another terrible loss." Miller stepped forward with the syringe raised. It was not filled with medicine. It was a clear liquid, potassium chloride, enough to stop a heart instantly. "No!" Cassidy screamed. She grabbed the closest item, a metal tray, and hurled it at Miller. It struck his shoulder, but had no effect at all. Miller let out a sharp, cold laugh. He lunged toward Dalton's intravenous line, aiming to push the poison into the port, but he made one huge error. He had totally forgotten about the Belgian Malinois. "Baron, get him! Attack!" Dalton shouted the command, using the last of his energy. Baron did not need to be told. He had been waiting for 6 long hours for this exact moment to unleash his fury. The dog launched himself from the foot of the bed. He was a streak of fur and rage. He did not go for the arm. He went straight for the chest. 80 pounds of solid muscle slammed into Miller like a cannonball, throwing him backward into the supply cart. Trays of instruments, vials of medication, and bags of fluid went flying with a loud shatter of glass. Miller shrieked as Baron's teeth clamped down on his forearm, the one holding the syringe. The crack of bone was audible over the chaos. The syringe flew across the room, but Miller was a trained operative. He was a corrupt government agent. With his free hand he felt for a hidden holster on his ankle. It contained a small handgun. "Cassidy, the weapon!" Dalton cried out. Miller delivered a powerful kick to the dog's side. Baron whimpered with pain, but did not let go. He thrashed his head violently, tearing through fabric and the flesh underneath. Miller raised the handgun, pointing it directly at the dog's head. Cassidy did not pause. She did not have a moment to consider. She just reacted. She saw the defibrillator on the wall. She tore the 2 paddles from the machine. They were always charged and prepared. "Clear!" she yelled, out of pure professional instinct. She was not about to use them on a patient. She lunged and pressed both paddles to Agent Miller's neck just as he pulled the trigger. Bang! The weapon discharged, and the bullet shattered the window. Zap! 200 joules of electricity shot through Agent Miller. His entire body went rigid. His eyes rolled back in his head. He convulsed as the gun fell from his hand. Barron released his grip as the man crumpled to the floor, still spasming. The room was suddenly quiet, apart from the dog's heavy breathing and the monitor's rhythmic beep. Security guards burst through the shattered door a second later, their weapons drawn. "Drop your weapon! Do it now!" Cassidy just stood there, gripping the defibrillator paddles like weapons, gasping for air. Miller's blood was splattered on her white scrubs. Barron stood over the unconscious agent on the floor. "He was trying to murder him," Cassidy panted, aiming a paddle at Miller. "Search his pockets and test that syringe." Captain Halloway shoved past the guards. He took in the entire scene, the downed agent, the heroic dog, and the young nurse with the paddles. He saw the bullet hole. He bent down and retrieved the syringe Miller had dropped. He smelled the needle. "Potassium," Halloway said under his breath. He glanced up at Cassidy. "You saved everyone a great deal of trouble, nurse." Dalton eased back onto his pillows, a faint smile on his lips. "That," he murmured, "is one incredible nurse." 6 months later, the silence of the Shenandoah Valley was very different from the silence of that hospital room. It was not the heavy quiet that settles just before a last heartbeat. It was a peaceful quiet, filled with the sound of wind in the branches, a distant tractor, and a dog's soft steps on the earth. The sign hanging from the iron gate was fresh, but the wood was weathered, with charred edges for a rustic feel. Burned into the oak were the words, "Dark Horse Sanctuary, a place of healing for the broken and the brave." Cassidy June stood on the large farmhouse porch, drying her hands on an old rag. She was no longer in her nurse's uniform. She had on comfortable blue jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves pushed up. The tattoo on her left shoulder, a shattered spear crossed with a lightning bolt, was exposed. It had become a symbol of her own resilience, gleaming in the Virginia sun. She rested on the railing, observing the activity in the 3-acre pasture below. To an outsider, it might have looked like chaos at a dog park. To Cassidy, it was a perfectly managed system of recovery. There were roughly a dozen dogs in the field. None of them was just an ordinary dog. A German shepherd with a titanium leg, a survivor of a drug raid in Mexico, a nervous Dutch shepherd covered in scars, retired from the police force due to a fear of loud noises, and a blind Labrador who lost his vision searching for bombs. These were the forgotten heroes, the dogs who were used by the system and then left behind. But right in the center of them, like a steady anchor, was Barron. The Belgian Malinois was a transformed dog. His tactical harness was gone, replaced by a simple, sturdy leather collar. His coat, once matted with the dirt of combat, now gleamed like dark metal. He moved with a confident, almost regal manner, weaving between the other dogs. He could stop a minor dispute with just a glance, and would gently guide the blind lab away from the fence. He was the leader of this pack. But he did not command them with fear. He led them with his own story of overcoming the odds. The screen door squeaked open behind Cassidy. A heavy boot scraped the floor, followed by the soft tap of a cane. A deep voice spoke. "You are watching him again." Cassidy smiled without looking away. "Just making sure our new dog does not learn how to dismantle the tractor." Dalton Rivers stepped onto the porch, leaner and tougher than he had been in the hospital. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the incident that nearly took his leg. But he was standing. He held 2 steaming cups of coffee and handed one to Cassidy. He leaned against the railing next to her, taking the weight off his injury. "He still misses it," Dalton said quietly, watching Barron track a hawk in the sky. "He misses the action, the purpose. You can take the dog out of the fight, but you cannot take the fight out of the dog." Cassidy blew on her coffee. "He is not on a mission anymore, Dalton. He is on watch. He knows this is his new home to protect." Dalton sipped his coffee, its warmth a familiar comfort. I know exactly how that feels. The past 6 months had been a journey neither of them expected. The events at the hospital in Norfolk started a domino effect that reached the highest levels of the Pentagon. The data chip Dalton hid in Barron's vest was more than just mission data. It was proof of a secret weapons ring run by a rogue group led by Agent Miller. The fallout was enormous. A storm of official investigations, court appearances, and news stories followed. Dalton and Cassidy were thrown into the spotlight. She was called the Angel with the unique tattoo, and he was the ghost who returned. They wanted no part of the fame. The same day Dalton received an honourable discharge and a Purple Heart. He put the medal away in a drawer. They used his military pension and her savings to buy this quiet farm. They had vanished again, but this time on their own terms. "They sentenced Miller today," Dalton said, his voice breaking the morning peace. He looked out at the distant trees, avoiding her eyes. A chill ran down Cassidy's back. "That is why I left the television off. He got life in prison, no possibility of parole," Dalton continued. "They are sending him to Leavenworth. He avoided a capital charge by giving up everyone in his network." "Good," Cassidy said, her voice sharp and brittle. She looked at the faint scar on her arm where Miller had grabbed her. "I hope he lives a long, miserable life." "He will," Dalton promised, clearing his throat and shifting his weight. "The Pentagon called me again." Cassidy turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess," she said. "They want Barron for a photo opportunity, or they want you to be a consultant for their new training programs?" "They asked for both," Dalton replied with a short, bitter laugh. "And they want to give Barron the Dickin Medal. It is like the Medal of Honor, but for animals. They want a big ceremony in Washington, D.C., a whole media circus." "What did you tell them?" Dalton's gaze shifted to the dogs. Barron was no longer moving. He stood perfectly still, his nose in the air, tasting the wind from the hills. He looked powerful, a perfect picture of instinct and loyalty. "I told them no," Dalton said softly. A genuine smile bloomed on Cassidy's face, creating small lines around her eyes. "What reason did you give?" "Because he does not need a medal," Dalton said, his voice filled with emotion. "A medal is just a symbol for people. It makes them feel better after sending dogs into harm's way. Barron does not care about shiny objects. He cares about his family. He cares about his duty." Dalton turned back to Cassidy, taking her hand in his. "Besides," Dalton said quietly, "he already has his greatest reward. He has us. He is home." Cassidy squeezed his hand. "We are all home." Just then a loud bang from the road shattered the calm as a truck backfired. The entire mood changed in an instant. The other dogs yelped and scattered in fear. The blind Labrador stumbled around, whimpering. Barron did not flee. He instantly dropped into a protective crouch. The hair on his back bristled as he showed his teeth. He put his body between the farm entrance and the other animals. Then he let out the deep, rumbling growl that once froze an entire SWAT team. On the porch, Dalton reacted, his hand automatically searching for a weapon that was not there. Cassidy felt her own heart pounding in her chest. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The truck's sound faded into the distance. Barron held his ground for another 10 seconds, scanning the area carefully. At last, he looked to the porch, making eye contact with Dalton. Dalton gave a tiny, nearly invisible nod. "Stand down," he whispered. Barron let out a heavy breath. He stood up, shook his whole body to get rid of the adrenaline, and went to the blind dog, giving it a comforting nudge with his nose. "Are you seeing that?" Cassidy whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He is still protecting us." Dalton looked at the woman who had rescued him, not with medicine, but with pure courage. He looked at the tattoo on her arm that had miraculously stopped a bullet. He then looked down at the cane he relied on. "We are a couple of broken things, aren't we, Cass?" he asked gently. Cassidy stepped closer and wrapped her arms around his waist. She put her head on his chest, feeling the strong, steady rhythm of a heart that had once stopped beating. "We are not broken, Ghost," she said, her voice a determined whisper. "We have been put back together. That is the whole idea of kintsugi. The gold used to fix the cracks makes the piece stronger and more beautiful." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "You and your beautiful stories," she laughed lightly. "This one happens to be true." Baron left the other dogs and made his way to the porch. They heard the soft click of his nails on the wooden steps. He walked right past his water bowl. He did not go to his usual spot. Instead, he lay down right between them and the path. He faced outward, a silent guardian protecting them from the world. He rested his head on his paws, but his ears were angled back, listening to them breathe. Dalton sat on the porch swing and pulled Cassidy down beside him. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, colours that reminded him of Afghanistan, but this time without the fear. "Hey, Baron," Dalton said softly. The dog's ear twitched in response. "Your watch is done, buddy," Dalton told him. "You are officially relieved of duty." Baron lifted his head, looking from Dalton to Cassidy. He let out a long, deep sigh that seemed to make the porch gently hum. He stayed right where he was, but his eyelids began to droop. For the first time in what felt like forever, the soldier was at rest. The guardian was finally at ease, watching over the only family he ever really wanted. Baron and Dalton proved to the world that the connection between a handler and his dog is not about commands. It is a bond of spirit that goes beyond orders, rules, and even life itself. In that hospital room, Cassidy June did more than just save one person. She saved a partnership. She showed us all that the best medicine is sometimes just fierce loyalty. Here at Dark Horse Sanctuary, our work continues. We no longer fight battles, but we help heal the warriors who have come home. If this story touched your heart, we have a new mission for you. We would like you to hit that like button. Do not do it for a computer program. Do it in honor of the service animals who stand watch for us while we sleep soundly in our beds. Please subscribe and turn on your notifications. We have so many more incredible true stories of courage and hope to share with you each week, and I am really looking forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you believe that dogs have a kind of sixth sense? Has an animal ever protected you when you felt you were in danger? We would be truly honored if you shared your own story with our community. Until our next story, please stay safe, hug your loved ones, and thank you for watching. "Good," Cassidy said, her voice sharp and brittle. She looked at the faint scar on her arm where Miller had grabbed her. "I hope he lives a long, miserable life." "He will," Dalton promised, clearing his throat and shifting his weight. "The Pentagon called me again." Cassidy turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess," she said. "They want Baron for a photo opportunity, or they want you to be a consultant for their new training programs?" "They asked for both," Dalton replied with a short, bitter laugh. "And they want to give Baron the Dickin Medal. It is like the Medal of Honor, but for animals. They want a big ceremony in Washington, D.C., a whole media circus." "What did you tell them?" Dalton's gaze shifted to the dogs. Baron was no longer moving. He stood perfectly still, his nose in the air, tasting the wind from the hills. He looked powerful, a perfect picture of instinct and loyalty. "I told them no," Dalton said softly. A genuine smile bloomed on Cassidy's face, creating small lines around her eyes. "What reason did you give?" "Because he does not need a medal," Dalton said, his voice filled with emotion. "A medal is just a symbol for people. It makes them feel better after sending dogs into harm's way. Baron does not care about shiny objects. He cares about his family. He cares about his duty. Dalton turned back to Cassidy, taking her hand in his. Besides, Dalton said quietly, he already has his greatest reward. He has us. He is home. Cassidy squeezed his hand. We are all home. Just then, a loud bang from the road shattered the calm as a truck backfired. The entire mood changed in an instant. The other dogs yelped and scattered in fear. The blind Labrador stumbled around, whimpering. Baron did not flee. He instantly dropped into a protective crouch. The hair on his back bristled as he showed his teeth. He put his body between the farm entrance and the other animals. Then he let out the deep, rumbling growl that once froze an entire SWAT team. On the porch, Dalton reacted, his hand automatically searching for a weapon that was not there. Cassidy felt her own heart pounding in her chest. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The truck's sound faded into the distance. Baron held his ground for another 10 seconds, scanning the area carefully. At last, he looked to the porch, making eye contact with Dalton. Dalton gave a tiny, nearly invisible nod. "Stand down," he whispered. Baron let out a heavy breath. He stood up, shook his whole body to get rid of the adrenaline, and went to the blind dog, giving it a comforting nudge with his nose. "Are you seeing that?" Cassidy whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He is still protecting us." Dalton looked at the woman who had rescued him, not with medicine, but with pure courage. He looked at the tattoo on her arm that had miraculously stopped a bullet. He then looked down at the cane he relied on. "We are a couple of broken things, aren't we, Cass?" he asked gently. Cassidy stepped closer and wrapped her arms around his waist. She put her head on his chest, feeling the strong, steady rhythm of a heart that had once stopped beating. "We are not broken, Ghost," she said, her voice a determined whisper. "We have been put back together. That is the whole idea of kintsugi. The gold used to fix the cracks makes the piece stronger and more beautiful." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "You and your beautiful stories," she laughed lightly. "This one happens to be true." Baron left the other dogs and made his way to the porch. They heard the soft click of his nails on the wooden steps. He walked right past his water bowl. He did not go to his usual spot. Instead, he lay down right between them and the path. He faced outward, a silent guardian protecting them from the world. He rested his head on his paws, but his ears were angled back, listening to them breathe. Dalton sat on the porch swing and pulled Cassidy down beside him. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, colours that reminded him of Afghanistan, but this time without the fear. "Hey, Baron," Dalton said softly. The dog's ear twitched in response. "Your watch is done, buddy," Dalton told him. "You are officially relieved of duty." Baron lifted his head, looking from Dalton to Cassidy. He let out a long, deep sigh that seemed to make the porch gently hum. He stayed right where he was, but his eyelids began to droop. For the first time in what felt like forever, the soldier was at rest. The guardian was finally at ease, watching over the only family he ever really wanted. Baron and Dalton proved to the world that the connection between a handler and his dog is not about commands. It is a bond of spirit that goes beyond orders, rules, and even life itself. In that hospital room, Cassidy June did more than just save one person. She saved a partnership. She showed us all that the best medicine is sometimes just fierce loyalty. Here at Dark Horse Sanctuary, our work continues. We no longer fight battles, but we help heal the warriors who have come home. If this story touched your heart, we have a new mission for you. We would like you to hit that like button. Do not do it for a computer program. Do it in honor of the service animals who stand watch for us while we sleep soundly in our beds. Please subscribe and turn on your notifications. We have so many more incredible true stories of courage and hope to share with you each week. and I am really looking forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you believe that dogs have a kind of sixth sense? Has an animal ever protected you when you felt you were in danger? We would be truly honored if you shared your own story with our community. Until our next story, please stay safe, hug your loved ones, and thank you for watching.